Welcome to the Lucent Perspective. I'm your host, Rebecca Hastings. I've spent over a decade working with executives in the tech sector and helped successful companies build their leadership teams and scale. During my career, I've been lucky to have the privilege of learning from many exceptional leaders. In these conversations, you'll get perspectives from peers, be inspired, and learn what it takes to become one of the best. This is your chance to listen to experts talking about the challenges, solutions, and the vital insights they've gained in their careers to date. Stuart, tell me about your career journey to becoming a CTO.
That's a big question, Rebecca, but let's give it a go. I used to be a developer in the sort of first third of my career, but I think I found the constraints of just looking at code on one application not enough for me. And after that, I started to look more heavily into architecture, which led me into a much broader range of skills, looking at how technologies actually influence business outcomes. And with that, you then just start getting exposure to more senior leaders, and then you start to put in context of developers and the creativity that they bring into the application and where that sits within a business and how that can provide real business value at that stage. So when you start going down that track, it's a one-way route towards, looking at CTO roles and having more influence on how a business operates and what direction it takes is what that path takes you towards. And that's really what drives me now, is being in roles in businesses using technology to transform them or scale them or just change direction, introduce new products and opportunities that technology brings to that. So I still feel like a developer at heart, but at the same time, I often end up translating non-technical conversations into technical conversations and vice versa. So that's probably been a lot of the years past that's taken me to where I am today. And I get a lot of joy at enabling teams and enabling businesses with different technologies and hopefully translating that into business value. So that's probably where all of that is taking me towards where I am today.
So technical, then gaining the commercial insights, but really grounding everything in technology seems to be a theme there. I guess the other thing that really stands out to me about your career is that you've worked in a real mix of startups and enterprise companies. Like, a lot of people find it really hard to move out of big corporate businesses and get into the startup world. So, you've had quite a breadth of experience there in the types of roles that you've had.
Yeah, and it's not an easy jump, and you need to know what you're getting into as well. And I think I've been fortunate where right in the very beginning of where I started to do commercial work, which was actually back in my university days, because we did a 1-year work placement, and in a lot of ways, I was really fortunate to land into a company of 5 people, which was a husband and wife team. And they were bootstrapping a lot of the software that they were doing, and it was going into asset management and risk management companies. But I was one of 2 developers, and you had to just graft it. There was no airs or graces. You had a whole ton of responsibilities. And you just had to learn things on the spot and deal with them as they came up. And that, in effect, is probably who I am on a personality level anyway. But my career path up to big corps like Royal London or Sky in particular, it's not been an immediate drop up to there. It's been a gradual, company of 5, then a company of 35, which became 55. In a company of 120 that became 250, and then graduating into that bigger arena was, easy in a lot of ways for me. I think I'm happy to adapt. I like adaptability. I like variety as well. But I think when you move into the bigger places, you do then start to see people that have only existed in that environment, and they struggle to kind of move sideways and move out of silos. And that, I suppose, is maybe what's differentiated me in those bigger environments, because I've had that early experience of having to do things for myself and move quite rapidly and pivot into quite different sort of situations without much warning and having to deal with that. I mean, and then you get into that space and you're dealing with much bigger problems on a much bigger scale. And it does give you an appreciation for how a company needs to operate at scale. And you can't, if you move back down the way into smaller businesses, into the startup world, they don't have that structure. They don't have that process. They are scrappy. They're moving and lurching from one thing to the next. One minute it could be fine, the next minute it could be a real crisis. And that juxtaposition from the kind of relative safety of a bigger company into that much greater level of risk in a smaller business is not for the faint-hearted. There is a lot of, again, if you're not used to it, you've got to just roll your sleeves up and get on with it. So you do need to have that real adaptability and sense of accountability as well, because there's not really someone behind you that you can look towards either. But I think because I'd started from that small place, went up to a bigger place, and then come back down again, I've crossed a lot of different industries and a lot of different sizes of businesses. So I then just start to see a lot of the problems being the same that you've got to solve. And how you go about doing them is the trick. You've either got a budget or you don't. You've either got people you can rely on or you don't. And you've just got to kind of adapt and shape to the situation. If you can try and do that, it's very rewarding, but I think it's not for everyone either. And some people, they like that consistency and routine. I don't, but then, it's just trying to fly by the seat of your pants often, but it's very rewarding, and I thrive on the variety of it all. It's not necessarily sometimes by design on my part. And I think what has just shaped my career is that ability to skip across industries, skip across companies, take something from one and put it into the other, even if it is from a scale up into an established business. And equally, you're going into a startup. If they want to scale, they need process, unfortunately. You can't be scrappy because you end up, biting your nose off and spite your face in some cases if you don't adhere to that. And that's just a natural maturity of a business as it needs to grow. And sometimes what founders don't want to hear because they want to be that kind of gung-ho startup. But it's a hard lesson for everybody. And it's just you have to be strong-willed and be confident in what you believe is right at the end of the day.
Great. So bringing different contexts together, seems to be something which has really helped you to enable the businesses you're in. I guess there's a lot that we can all learn from different organizations. It's a bit unhealthy sometimes to think of people's career as siloed, like they're a startup person or they're a corporate person. It's great to see someone who's broken that mold. So you're now at Bloom Procurement Services. Tell me a bit about Bloom.
Bloom is a new experience for me again. So we're a private company, founder-led, about 10 years old. It's received private equity investment in the last couple of years, which is helping it to start to reorientate its position as a business and where it positions itself within its market. The market itself is largely focused on public sector. So for me, it's a real first experience of dealing and working closely with public sector, which I've not done heavily across my career. I guess maybe to some degree, I like to have, keep my toe in with the private sector roots of a business. So I like the blend of it. And Bloom, what they do at the moment is they offer a managed service to public sector, and it is in the procurement world. But actually what that means is that it's helping and supporting the public sector delivering projects. And that's working largely with private sector suppliers. And that can be anywhere from an initiative at the central government level to do with the NHS, so the Met Police, Home Office, and we're looking to win further work with things like the MOD and so on. So lots of really powerful things that happen at central government level. But equally, we also are adaptable and we offer and work with a lot of local governments as well. So that could be building schools, building hospitals, could be green initiatives, or even powering electric vehicles into certain regions as well. So a huge spread of projects that we've delivered over the years. And we work with over about 4,000 suppliers and connect them to those projects. So in a lot of ways, we are an aggregation platform, largely out of birth over the last few years, being a manual employee-led business of about 90 people currently. So the next steps for us are quite exciting, where we can then start to employ technologies to move Bloom into a different arena altogether.
So it sounds like that kind of background that you have, where you've been working in like bigger companies, you've been working on actual digital transformations as well as startups, is everything's kind of coming together on you being able to use all of those kind of like strings to your bow just now.
Very much. And it's taken an existing business with a well-established and successful business model. So if you think about it in startup terms, the proposition and the product that it offers has been more than validated as there being a big market. And just to make it clear, we probably process over £250 million worth of project work over the course of the year. And we're looking to get that, 3-4 times that over the next few years. So that's a lot of projects. It's a lot of delivery. And there's an addressable market of, I'm sure it's about 70 billion actually in the UK alone. So there's a huge space to operate in there. And I think what I enjoy is taking that existing business that's been very successful and then starting to look at how do we optimize, how do we scale it, what technologies are available that are applicable to this business today. A lot of what we're doing currently is building an engineering function, which has never existed before in the business, as well as bringing in a lot of cloud and DevOps skills and technologies to support that. And then also looking at data. If you look at that Bloom deal with both local and central government projects, we're a perfect aggregation site effectively to accumulate and make sense of what projects, what outcomes are being delivered. So there's a huge amount of potential that I enjoy tackling, and there's a lot of good investment, a lot of good people, and a lot of strong knowledge about the sector and the business that Bloom has. So it's got a lot of really good ingredients. It's just working out what's the recipe that we need to put in play to really power the business over the next few years. So yeah, it's making use of a lot of my skill set and experience that I've built up over the years.
So one of the things that I encountered when I was looking into Bloom and speaking to you about what Bloom Procurement Services are doing was this concept of social value that's talked about. Can you explain a bit about that and talk me through some of the ways that Bloom are really providing that social value?
It's a big mix. And in essence, with things like ESG, which is environmental, social governance initiatives, which is becoming much more visible and certainly will do, I think, over the course of next year. A lot of what Bloom are focused on in terms of social value is, like I said, it's about, in the end, facilitating a project that allows us to build schools. It also helps support existing schools and hospitals, initiatives on the ground at a local level. It could be anywhere from environmental and green initiatives that a local government wants to do and work with the right suppliers. So we've got a lot of vetted suppliers that are ready to go, and we know who they are. And there'll be a bigger focus from us on what the criteria will be for selecting suppliers based on the needs of the client being local or central government. So even at a top or governmental level, if we're wanting to build a school through environmental or ethical means, or work with suppliers that we know are also doing their bit as well. So it's not just a case of the end outcome, but the process of which suppliers we use can lead to good outcomes by simply utilizing them. Helps promote a really good outcome overall. I think the key thing that sometimes gets lost within the public sector world is how much is being spent, and you hear it in the news all the time. I think Bloom can bring it to life and actually say, well, yes, this amount of money was spent, but this is what the outcome was at the end. And I think it's just making it a much clearer, transparent view of the taxpayers' money and what value are they getting out the back of it in which parts of the country, and does that translate into success. So I think the more we can look at that further and really harness a lot of the data that we collect naturally by processing a project, we've got a real chance of bringing to light a lot of what's transpired from delivering a project, and it's making it more than some of its parts fundamentally. So a lot of the social value part of it is very genuine at Bloom. The culture at Bloom is very much focused on that. We've got people in key roles that specifically what they look at is social value outcomes. So it's not a thing that just happens by chance. It's by design, and it's something that we're going to do a lot more heavily on over the course of next year.
It sounds like a really purposeful company, and I can imagine that, working in technology there and knowing that you're using all your skills to make more of an impact, especially around such, topical and valuable areas around, reducing the cost of public services and delivering better outcomes to community. Must be really motivational.
It is. I mean, when I've worked in places before, you can still find some of those elements of, is what I'm doing worthwhile? But, sometimes it can be buried under a lot of corporation and commercialization of things and so on. So it is actually certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, one of the best places that I've worked, which really does live and breathe that type of thing. And actually, it is a huge motivator in that what we're doing is actually worthwhile. And there's also more of a desire in the business across all corners of it to do much more of it as well. And I think it's really, for me, in my role, knowing that technology has a massively instrumental part in leveraging that further, it's immensely rewarding.
So tell me a bit about the team that you've been building.
Well, that's been a really enjoyable part of the last 12 months. So I came into Bloom around about October 2021, and that was just the very beginning of the new program of work that we've been working on over this year. So we've just started to build out new features at a minimum viable product level. So we're just doing that with a very soft touch early feedback loop. But a lot of, if you look back the way, there was a blank page. I came into the role, I'm Bloom's first formal CTO, and the build of that has been around engineering and data, and then also starting to focus on operations. So that's not just internal operations as well, but equally starting to think about how do we externalize, what does it mean for the customer, uptime on the platform that we've got, and we're evolving at the moment, is going to really start to break new grounds next year as we start to adopt more of a cloud strategy and across that. And that means being able to pull down a lot of new features and develop new codes and languages and skills. So it's been really rewarding over the course of this year, starting to build out engineering, watching that team grow and equally start to break out into different squads. Starting to also develop a product life cycle. So there's been a much bigger emphasis on product in the business too. So we've got a really strong product life cycle that feeds into engineering, and we can now release and build codes with, multi-day releases, as and when things are ready, we can push it straight through to production. So that when people talk about release windows and so on, it's not relevant for us. Every hour could be a release window fundamentally. So it's bringing that sort of agility into the business. And it's not just been about the technology, but it's the people. What we bring in is personality as well. And I'm really proud of a lot of the people that have come in the last 6 months. They've really made their mark, hit the ground running, come in with the right attitudes. And for me, it's just giving people what they need to be their best self fundamentally. And my role is to help support and culture these people coming in and moving forward.
And the team's remote first. How are you making that work? Especially with everybody being new and all the change and the growth. I'm intrigued to learn more.
The answer is I don't know in some ways, because it's just happening quite organically. I think a lot of it's down to the right personalities. We are using tools that, most people are familiar with nowadays, whether it's using Slack or Miro. We're also now starting to adopt Notion and move away from things like Confluence. We still use tools like Jira for managing the backlog and so on. But I think if you get the right mix of tools that in and of themselves have also got a wee bit of personality and character, that allows people to kind of use them in their own personal way. And I feel, the team itself, just to give everybody a kind of idea, is, I'm based in Edinburgh, and I've got a head of engineering that's based in the Cotswolds. I've got people based in Leeds. I've got people based in the northeast of England. We've also got parts of the team based out in Eastern Europe within Romania and Moldova. And yet, every day that I'm interacting with everybody, it feels like everybody's actually together. And whether we just jump into a Miro board, or we're using Slack, or we just pick up a video call, everybody's just, I think, got a common purpose, I suppose. I think that probably helps unite a lot of everybody of what we're actually doing. It's not disparate. We've really got a kind of key focus, a bit of a North Star of what we're heading towards, which is a lot of what I bring to the table, is just giving everybody that direction and vision of what we're doing. And then largely just leaving a lot of the rest of it to everybody else to figure out and work out what's the best way you want to work. We've just got a really good pattern. I suppose a lot of it's a bit of routine, a bit of scheduling, stand-ups, speaking to people, being transparent, and a lot of it's down to those behaviours that we want to bring into the business.
So you mentioned it a few times, but it's something that's definitely worth us exploring a bit more. Building culture is really important to you. And I know that Bloom has some very strong trademark values, like we work together, we're curious, we're real and true. Talk to me about how that fits in with the culture of the engineering team.
I think those three in particular are very, very important, because I want people in the team that are inventive, that bring a bit of innovation, that also speak their voice as well. And I certainly value that. Certainly helps me. And it's also how I thrived over the years of my career, is working with really good people and learning from others and getting ideas from others as well. And I think that culture of sharing and, the way that you get ideas is actually not accepting the status quo. And a lot of what we're doing at Bloom has to be about change, change within the company, and therefore change around the industry that we're operating in, so that we can bring the best to light for a lot of the things that our clients want to produce and deliver. So it does translate very, very heavily into what we do. When you're doing engineering, it is, I think you get out what you put in. It's not a passive exercise. It's a bit like cooking. If you're making something and you really want it to be really tasty and, please people that are eating it, if you put that passion into what you're doing, people feel that at the end of it. So it is like handwriting or your own DNA that you put into it. And I think the more that you can leverage, the more that you can understand about the business, the more that you can put into the engineering efforts that we do, and therefore the product that we're building. So it's really, really vital. It's not airy-fairy BS that we talk about with that. And I think we did spend a lot of time as a business looking at those key behaviours. And everybody's worked in places where there's 12, or there's nobody really adheres to them, or we see posters. We don't have anything like that. I think we do look at the people right from recruitment as to who we're bringing in and whether they've got the right culture fit. And often in the last year, the ones that have really stood out are the ones that we've really focused on those behaviours. And sure enough, they're the ones that are bringing a lot of the A game to the team.
That's great to hear. I think when I was like thinking about those values and what they would look like in action, I think, you talk a little bit in amongst the values about taking time to understand people. And I think that actually runs through all three of them. It makes working together more effective. If you're someone who naturally wants to understand people, you're going to have that curiosity. Well, you're more likely to about the work that you're doing. And I think people who have that kind of empathy or care about the other people around them, that they are more likely to be a bit more authentic and, show that vulnerability that we need to start getting comfortable with if we're not already comfortable with these days.
I absolutely agree with that.
And case in point, we've got a couple of people that started in the last 3 to 6 months, and two opposite ends of the country, one in Northern Ireland and one in just north of London. And, I think because of their personalities and the type of people that they are, and that's why we wanted to bring them into the team, they've then volunteered and taken it upon themselves to effectively be sort of cultural ambassadors within the team. So they're, without me having to push it from the top down. And this is where it shouldn't all be driven by me. And I think that's the key to it as well, as getting the right people in. That culture can't be forced upon people. It has to be, as you say, authentic. And, it also has to be devolved into the team so that people really believe in it. And that means that it kind of builds and snowballs, because then when they're involved in recruitment and bringing further people into the team, they're going to bring in those same sort of people in it. And so it just starts to accumulate, and that's how you build it. And it does take a bit of time, and it is something that you've got to really treasure. It's really valuable because, again, you get that right, then the types of work that people work on, we see that in the end product. And therefore, that is our proposition, is all about people. And getting those really good people in is so vital. That's what I'm really excited about next year, because we've got much more recruitment to do and grow the team further. So I can see the culture really starting to not just establish itself, but to grow further and expand. And I don't know what that will look like, but I'm really excited about what I'll see from that.
So, it sounds like you're still very much on a journey there, but you've done quite well at embedding those values and getting that culture within the tech team. What would be your top tips to summarize, if someone's struggling to get that culture established as they go, look, what's worked for you?
I think a couple of key hires. I think certainly I'm not looking to have a huge senior leadership team around me. I think having a couple of really strong people around you that you can rely on and trust, and then also give them delegated authority so that they feel that they can then own a piece of it as well. I certainly don't have all the answers. And, I think for me, I create hopefully a bit of a transparent communication and relationship with people, and also look for feedback on myself. So perhaps that approach has always seen me well. I'm still recognized for a lot of those things too. Whether is that a big factor in how things are today. But I do think just getting a couple of key hires, not just for myself, but within other parts of the team, like the example I gave there about those two people within the engineering team. One is a front-end engineer and one's an automation engineer. And I think they're key hires for us because they're really setting the tone on the culture. And I've got a really good relationship there, but visibility of what's going on. And I like that, And so I think it's just getting those few key people in to begin with. And that can be hard to begin with if you haven't got them. But once you start to identify and get that in, it then starts to really make the difference. And it's just based on trust. People that you can depart, they're acting as a facet of who you are. And maybe part of that is some of the parts of me that's not as strong. But those other people are bringing that in that help complement my weaknesses. And so it creates a real unity across the team and strengthens everything as a result. So it's sad to say no one's the the full article. You've got your strengths and weaknesses, and it's just trying to be self-aware enough to identify they can complement what I don't do well, but needs to happen, and therefore I can trust them, and then they can own that themselves because they're strong in that area. So.
And you mentioned that you're working with a number of collaboration tools, and that's basically how your team collaborate if they're fully remote. Which ones have you found most effective or engaging?
I think the two that stand out are going to be Slack and Notion. And my head of engineering, Andrew, would love me talking about Notion because he's in love with it. And I think the two things about those tools, and in some ways it's kind of sad that Slack is owned by Salesforce now. However, I think it does sort of capture a real community spirit about it. If most people will be in organizations which has Teams from Microsoft and will probably have to use Slack at the same time. I do. We've got Teams, and it probably acts as the more enterprise tool for the wider business. But certainly within my team, we fundamentally use Slack. And I think for me, it feels like an extension of myself. When I'm using it, it's quite intuitive. It allows me to have communication and conversations with nuance and some character that helps just translate how you're feeling or what you're trying to put across without it having to be a big dialogue or a big video call. You can get things done really quickly without it being orthogonal to who you are. And I think Notion as well kind of takes that further from a documentation point of view. It keeps it fresh. It keeps it fun. I think that's the real key thing, is to use tools that are fun and good to use, that add value. You don't need and have to promote it. People just start to use it. I mean, I remember something from years ago, late 90s, that talked about this, about tools that are just easy to pick up and use. People will just use them and they just spread like wildfire. And those are the ones that you should really adopt, I think, because then you're just pushing an open door at that stage. So Notion, I think, is one that's growing as well. And again, it's just really easy to add comments, documentation. It doesn't have to be a big exercise. You can just make it piecemeal and just grow it up and evolve it. I think that's probably what people like to do. And it's just fitting in with everybody's schedule and making it really easy for people to interact. And those two kind of stand out for me.
And I think that ever-evolving nature and how everyone contributes, that evolution almost makes it feel a bit more like their space.
Yeah. And I think that's the real key part of it, is that it's got a bit of character and personality to it. We were even experimenting with a tool called Grapevine, which gave you a sort of avatar. It was actually really fun. The team really enjoyed it. It allowed you to create a little bit of a virtual environment if you wanted to try and simulate some element of sort of a spatial dimension of the workspace visually. And again, you could personalize it and customize it. And it was a bit 2D, sort of 8-bit Sega Master System from the early 90s style about it. But we experimented with that, and I wouldn't rule it out bringing it back in. Again, I'll be guided by what the team want to do with that. But I think it is all about a wee bit of personality and customization. You feel like you've got your own style and space, and it's not forced upon you, and it's also not lost. I think there's nothing worse than having this sort of soulless corporate machine. And I think Bloom are not like that at all. We're certainly not the size to become that. But equally, it's a very relaxed environment. It's very flexible, as you say, remote first. A lot of the team all work remotely, but again, we've got an office in Newcastle, which is reasonably easy for everybody to get to, and it's still important to meet up, I think. We try and meet up periodically, mainly just to maintain that social connection a little bit, and have a bit of a plan for what we meet up for. But it doesn't feel like we're missing that on a day-to-day basis, which is amazing.
That's so good to hear. So, obviously, you're a CTO and a trained architect. I'm interested to know from you, what tech developments are coming around the corner that are looking exciting to you, or things that you think that we should be keeping more of a close eye on?
I think I like the underdog. That's always my style. And I think the immediate one that people maybe think of is blockchain, AI, machine learning, or crypto and all those type of things. These type, 3D virtual reality, metaverse, they're all buzzwords. I think the one that will probably surface over the next few years is going to be, again, back to Tim Berners-Lee, going back to the roots of the World Wide Web. He's developing Web 3.0, which again is a bit buzzy. It's a wee bit buzzwordy, but he started up a business called Solid a few years ago. And what that means is it's starting to centralize data. So we all have data. Everybody's probably got how many times have you signed up, whether it's Facebook, Google, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Tesco, Amazon, the list goes on. You've had to repeat yourself and silo your data across hundreds of platforms. They own that data. You might think you own it, but you don't really. How they utilize it, you don't really know what they're doing with it. And so, in effect, your data is sitting on servers across the planet, and you don't know where they are, what it's doing. If that company gets sold or it goes bust, what happens to that data? So I think what he's doing with Solid is it's starting to centralize the data. Well, so what that means is that you own that data. I would have what's called a pod. And it means that pod you can lease out to a company. So if we did it all over again, we would all have had one pod, and that's the only place that you could find me. And if I wanted to use Twitter would have to ask permission to use my data in my pod. And if I decided to leave Twitter, they don't keep my data. It stays within my pod. So it puts real control back into our hands about where's my data, who's got access to it, and how's it being used. And it's total control over it. And I think in this age, it's going to be difficult because I think the genie is out of the bottle. But I think the more that can develop, and he started up another company called Interrupt that is now starting to leverage the Solid technology model. I think he's just doing a bit of a trial within Belgium at the moment. So things like GDPR with the EU obviously pioneers a lot of that. Okay. And so watch the space. I think it's very important of how we know where our data is and how it's being used. If you think about the way that echo chambers work within social media, that's all because these algorithms are using your data. And what do you actually get in return for that? So I think it's putting a real currency and value back into our data model and who owns it and how we can control it. So I think watch out for more for Tim Berners-Lee with the Web 3.0. But underneath the covers, it's all about your data and how that starts to centralize.
And data like that is essentially your identity now in a huge part of your life. You wouldn't go sharing your passport the way that you share some information about yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, think about that. It's like saying that I've got 100 passports out there. I've got my Amazon passport, my Google passport, my Facebook passport, and I've just let that go. And they can do and trade on that passport with whatever they feel like. Or worse, by accident or by design, someone breaches it, has access to that passport, and then fraud and, doxing and all that type of thing starts to then happen, which is rife in that environment just now. Data within the internet is fundamentally broken. It's out of control. And we've no idea. Every company's tried and attempted to put controls around it, and it's all subverted or failed and so on. You just have to look at Cambridge Analytica with Facebook as a prime example of that. So yeah, I think it comes back to my passport is my identity and my identity is my passport with data. And that's fundamentally what that means. So that really appeals to me. And I think it's a real longer term value that we need at the heart of things over the next 50 to 100 years is ideas like that. It stops the commercialization of these big corporations that make millions and billions out of our identities fundamentally. There's a sort of ethical edge to that, which I like. Back to social value.
Yeah, it is very true. I mean, it always amazes me what I can find out about some people when I really want to. And it's so hard to know what people are finding out about yourself, who's accessing that information, what their intentions are. And you're going to always have stuff out there publicly. We're social creatures, be it online or in person. But I think that anything we can do in that space is going to be immensely valuable.
Yeah, transformative, I think.
Totally. So one of the things that I'd just like to circle back to before we finish up here is that bit at the start we discussed around your career, how you went from large corporates and startups and SMEs and corporates and then back to startups. And that's really interesting. Lots of people struggle to make that transition, and they really want to, especially when they're, kind of like a senior or executive level in a business. They find it hard for, particular startups to see how, working in a big company is going to translate to being an effective leader in a much smaller environment. What tips would you have for people wanting to go through that move, or for, businesses, especially like the more startups that are being presented with talent from more corporate environments?
I think if you're downsizing, I think you need to be careful about what you're getting into. The statistics of successful startups are not great. Something like 1 in 10 will make it, for example. So you need to make sure that if you're going to invest a lot of your time, professionally and personally, in something, that has to be worth it. So whether that's getting equity, speaking about it on a sort of mercenary kind of level, you really need to make sure that you've got a wee bit of skin in the game, I think. Certainly if you're going to be coming in at a leadership level, I think that's really important, because I think it does give you and drive a sense of accountability and ownership of what we're doing. And if you're going to really invest a lot of time into it, I think it's worth having something that you get out of it as well. A startup journey, if it's thinking about being acquired or getting further rounds of investment, that's probably going to be a 5 or 10 year journey fundamentally. It's not a flash in the pan, go in a couple of years, get sold, make millions. If anyone tells you that, they've never done it, and there's a bit of pipe dream. So I think doing a bit of homework on that company, knowing what the product is, what's the problem it's trying to solve, is there a market fundamentally that it's trying to operate in that it will take hold, what's the investors like, what's the investment circle being, what's the board structure looking like, what's the levels of control. You do need to understand all of that. Do not go in blind to that, because all these things will really matter. You will have a lot of interactions with that, not just doing a job and not just doing what you need to do within a team structure. Those sort of organisation and investment infrastructure is really key to it. And knowing that these things have got the right foundations is, I think, the real basis for then success. How you operate within that is down to you, but I think the parts that you can control are all those other aspects of it. So I think, I'd say that in hindsight, I've been lucky in that I probably didn't do enough homework in the past. I did sort of leap into it, maybe on gut feel and instinct, and it's kind of worked out to work with good people that I'm still working with today. The outcome that I was probably looking for didn't quite materialise there, but again, the experience that I got from it was really, really valuable, really valuable. But I think making sure that all of the right ingredients in that case, and these are things that you're not exposed to in a big corporate. You in a big company, you don't see the board, what the investment looks like. It's probably a business that's been around 20 to 80 years. It's long past any of that type of thing. So none of that really prepares you for then jumping straight into the deep end of a startup, where immediately you're got faced into these type of things. And it's a real steep learning curve. So you can't just wait for someone to sort of take you through it. You've got to really understand it and really do your homework.
And for the companies looking at talent, what do people from big company backgrounds bring to a startup, in your opinion?
I think knowing what the end destination starts to look like and working back the way, and knowing what scale looks like as well. Bringing in a bit of maturity too, and that isn't always easy. And again, you have to kind of compromise a little bit on that, because that corporate end is way too rigid and it is too bureaucratic for what a startup needs. And it's just trying to have enough of a bit of common sense to know which parts would work and which parts wouldn't in order to move the startup to that next level. But I do think having a breadth of experience at that corporate level certainly does give you a lot of good ingredients to take into the startup world, but there's just bits that you won't be prepared for. But I think for me, it's been, and that's in a big company, you are probably exposed to a lot of different technologies. You've got more of an opportunity to work with a big range of different people. And I think if you have garnered that really well, even if it has been instinctual, you then start to know what good looks like because of that end product. And you're not going to see that immediately within a startup. And I think it's that maturity and experience that you bring in to help nurture and guide that company to get it through that change curve, to allow it to mature, to allow it to scale. But you're always going to get your fingers burnt. You know, if you take it too far and it's too bureaucratic, there's just going to be a bit of a backlash. And I think you just have to pick and choose which battles you think are the most important.
Thanks for that. That's really interesting, Stuart. And thanks for sharing your insights and thoughts on some of these matters. It's been really good to learn, especially about the culture and the concept of social value and how practical that is at Bloom. So thanks very much for your time, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Excellent. I really enjoyed that. Thanks very much, Rebecca.
Thanks for listening to the Lucent Perspective. I'm Rebecca Hastings, founder and director at the Lucent Group, a tech sector executive search and talent consultancy. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. If you're a company looking to hire top technology leaders, or you'd like to discuss your next move, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or send me an email to rebecca@thelucentgroup.co.uk. Thanks again for listening today.